If you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going to go.
Navy nurses have made a significant contribution to the care of military personnel.
The Navy Nurse Corps' mission is to incorporate as much as we can about our history.
We have a very significant responsibility for preserving our memorabilia and also collecting both oral histories and museum artifacts.
The reason we have the history is to see how the Navy Nurse Corps has changed through the years. I mean, we've really grown through the years. We've kept up with technology. It's fun to look back and see how it was and then see it how it is now and have this recorded for posterity. It's part of our legacy.
The online museum is a collection of historic items from the Navy Nurse Corps, whether it be old uniforms, old nurses' caps,
syringes, medical equipment. There are so many different things. It's very hard to actually talk about each of them because it's a plethora of different items.
And you're able to go online and see them and see what's there. And then you also have a process that you're able to contribute anything from your tour of duty.
There really is no one else holding that light that burns for every nurse that has ever served in the Navy Nurse Corps.
So it provides a place for us as Navy nurses to have a rich collection of our history.
Whenever you're able to capture that and share that memorabilia and then to connect that memorabilia to the stories and the fabrics of history, I think that that's critical.
To preserve the history of our organization, we have the Oral History Project, where individual Navy nurses are being interviewed.
We sit them down, we make appointments with them, we have recordings of their history.
When we talk with these Navy Nurse Corps officers who think, oh, I was just doing my job, we realize they were doing more than just their job. They were making history.
Once those histories have been taken, then we put those into a transcription. Some of them actually have gone to the Library of Congress, but some of them are also kept with our museum.
The Historical Project is open to any Navy nurse who wants to give an oral history. You don't have to be a member to participate.
And what we would love to be able to do is to get many active duty members to come forward and just tell stories about their career.
When you go, your history goes with you. So this is an opportunity to have your legacy documented.
If we don't tell the stories, who's going to tell it for us?
We don't want to lose all of that like we have, unfortunately, in the past.
Sometimes it's easy to forget that you truly contributed in a number of different ways. And the Navy Nurse Corps is one of those associations that reminds you how we contributed as Navy nurses really made a difference.
We can learn a lot from what individuals that came before us experienced.
And when I came in, I hadn't seen an officer who looked like me at a rank of 05, a rank of 06. It just didn't exist. To the point where today, before I retired, I was a known entity within my community. Well, I got there because we didn't forget to tell that story.
And now you've got women going into combat. We have Navy nurses who are commanding officers of hospitals. This is some wonderful changes that I've seen through the years.
So the Oral History Project captures all of that and gives us an opportunity to elevate and celebrate these stories.
It is a large endeavor that we have been undertaken. I would encourage people to go to the website, to the virtual museum, and look at it. And I'd also encourage people to donate to our program because we cannot sustain this historical program without support.
So here is an organization that is committed to taking that history both orally and tangibly, and you just can't put a price on that.
When you got your orders to the repose, were you happy about that?
I was thrilled. I was thrilled. My mother wasn't thrilled. She says, "You tell them you can't go." And I remember saying, "Mom, I can't tell them I can't go." So after she realized that, that she's going to go, so it was a big thing, Vietnam and all, she was worried, of course, which is understandable, but I was thrilled. Well, I worked in intensive care, so that was a big jolt to me because I worked in the OR, and the big difference is, I don't know why they think, nurses that worked in the OR can handle intensive care. That's a whole different bag. Mm-hmm. Plus, we were still using the powdered penicillin, and I remember the first time we were on the line, it took me about an hour to draw up all these medications, because this stuff does not dissolve very well, And finally, they came up with the Tubex and stuff, but before that, it was, the stain mold, the needles were all reused again, and so it was a challenge. I found it was very hard at first. And then finally, after 9 months being there, I got moved on to the ward, so my patients I could talk to. Most of the ones I had, a lot of them were badly injured, and couldn't talk to you, so. And then they were giving us those pills for malaria, and some of the patients would develop a reaction. They get a seizure, grand mal seizures, which was, kind of a little bit scary, to see things. But most of the patients we took care of, most of them we were able to save. I had one boy that was banged up really bad. They had the ENT doctor aboard. He had built a helmet to hold all the pieces of his bones of his face together. A bullet had gone through and out the other end. And about 9 months later, and he was still on the ship, and I didn't know it, but I heard this boy complaining about not getting to eat something more than Jell-O and all that, and it was the same young man. So I went over to him and told him, "Hey, you got the helmet off, you look good, and it'll be a little while before you have a steak, but it won't be long."
While you were on active duty, was there anything that jumps out at you as being, say, the most challenging, either career or professional-wise, that you haven't already touched on?
Well, I think it was very challenging to be the first nurse practitioner class, only because nobody knew what to expect. The doctors didn't have any clue what this was all about, and nursing service was not happy because we took up nursing billets. And so they were not pleased that they had to give up 3 billets for somebody that they didn't know what was, and they didn't have any control over. But I must say, when I graduated, one of the OB/GYN captains came up to me and said, "Tina, I was really against this when you came." But he said, "I can certainly see the benefit of it now." He was the obstetrician over at Coronado. And we used to go over to his clinic and run what we called PAP clinics. And we'd go over and 50 people would sign up, and there were 3 of us. And he said, "I have never, I didn't realize what advantage this was." And so that was a real challenge, to be breaking ground. But it was also the greatest fun because we got to watch the residents grow up. And a lot of the people in the community now who are head of their departments were residents at Balboa with me. And it is fun to watch them mature and grow up and get to be important people. And so it was enjoyable, but it was also a challenge. I would always tell my prenatal patients that I was a nurse practitioner, but they didn't understand. They thought I was they didn't know what. They'd say, "I want to see the doctor substitute." But one day recently, in the last 5 years, I was at Immaculata going to church, and a lady came up to me and she said, "You're Lieutenant Hooker, aren't you?" And I said, "I was Lieutenant Hooker." And she said, "You took care of me when I was pregnant." And she said, "I just want to tell you that my son is now a nurse practitioner." And I thought the fact that she remembered I was a nurse practitioner, but the thought that I took care of a little baby inside that grew up to be a nurse practitioner made me really feel good. When I was in Sasebo, we did not have fetal monitors. And if you did a pit drip, the obstetrician had to sit there and hold the belly to see how big the contractions were, and the nurse had to take the vital signs. But I mean, that's how much. We did not have a cardiac monitor, and we had a cardiac arrest while I was there. And we ran continuous EKG paper until they brought us, luckily there was a carrier in town, and they brought a cardiac monitor over from the carrier until they could get a jet down from Yokosuka to pick up the patient. But I mean, nursing has evolved. I don't know what we would have done, you know, but we had an awful lot of paper on the floor.
I did med-surg. They would, you'd rotate around a little bit. Whatever ward was busiest, you would get pulled for that or pulled for this. And my actual title, I was also the psych nurse. They had a small psychiatric unit there. To preface this, I want to say that the camaraderie between the patients was outstanding. They would help each other. They were dedicated to each other, and they didn't care. They really didn't care what was the matter with them as a whole. They wanted to make sure that their buddy was going to be okay. And that in itself is very uplifting when you're in such a situation.
Did you mostly have Marines, or were the Army and Navy, Air Force?
Army and Marines, and occasionally Navy. The Marines and the Army would tease each other. If we had an influx of Marine Corps patients, the few Army guys would say, oh, they don't know how to fight, and vice versa. And one of the funniest things is that I never expected to see malaria. We studied malaria quite deeply in my diploma school of nursing, and that was the end of it. Well, lo and behold, we get influxes of patients who had malaria. And the drugs they were getting would often make them a little goofy, quinine psychosis, if you will. And at that time, we had rolls of cotton. We didn't have cotton balls. So we would have patients help us roll cotton balls, very sanitary, you know, and put him in a bath of alcohol. And this one young man, I can see him to this day. I just wish I knew everybody's name. He was doing that for us, very quiet, and a malaria patient. All of a sudden, he starts eating the cotton balls. He honestly thought they were marshmallows. And then within minutes of us stopping him, don't eat the cotton balls, he runs out on deck, just ran out, and our corpsman had to tackle him because his hallucinations went as far as he thought his mother was out there walking on the water, and he was going to run to his mother.
Wow.
And he made it, I think, pretty much so, but they had to be very careful with those medications.
I didn't really actually realize that they could be that dramatic in the psychosis.
Yeah.
That was really something.
Yes.
Yeah, so you had quite a few experiences, and there was times when it was busy, and then times when it wasn't so busy. Isn't that right?
Yes. However, I will say that 1968 was one of the biggest years of the war, the total casualties, and we would adjust our working hour. Pretty much we had one day off a week if we possibly could to write letters and do your laundry and stuff like that. However, for months on end, we would work 12-hour shifts and maybe not even have a day off. And then we were the first crew, if you will, we were out on the line for 90 days straight. And normally every month or 6 or 8 weeks, whatever, I can't remember, we would go into the Philippines. We would drive out to the Philippines to get repaired and drop patients off, things of that nature.
I think you have a picture of the sanctuary there with one of your pictures. Maybe you can show us that picture.
This is a decoupage that somebody did for me.
Oh, it's lovely. If you had it to do all over again, would you do it?
Yes, I would.